and the government wish to publish new guidance regarding school children who wish to transition. And it'll be now given a reflection period. Now, recent years have seen a rise in students who wish to identify as different genders. So should schools help communicate between pupils and parents? And what are the stigmas that come with discussing transgender politics? So it's time now for Political Spotlight. To discuss that with me, I'm joined by MP for Eastbourne, Caroline Ansell. Caroline, thank you very much for joining me. Caroline, I want to start, usually in Political Spotlight, somebody else is right in the autocue. We always find out a little bit about you first. So, Caroline, talk to me about you. Why did you get into politics in the first place?
Well, actually, my background is education, and I was for many years a teacher, but it was a health crisis for my then very young son. He was just 5 years old, and we had a shock diagnosis of a life-threatening brain tumour. And in that period, with that NHS experience, that is really what led me into politics. I had just such an overwhelming need to give something back, having experienced such amazing care at the time, and his little life was saved. So it was health that took me actually to Parliament, although my heart beats with learning and with schools.
Yeah. Now, when you see, because obviously I used to lecture in schools, I've seen how the schools have changed even in the last 8 years, and how it's literally unrecognisable, especially since COVID. Now, with regard to the transgender issues, how do you feel things are going with that? Because the government have now come up and said that parents will have to be contacted. They've put some guidelines in place. What is your thought and your overview on what you're seeing within schools and the whole sort of conversation around it?
Sure. Well, it's not actually been that long since I was in schools. I made a return in that Omicron wave to help keep schools open. But of course, schools have been very much on the front line here with this exponential rise in the number of young children, young people looking to identify in a different gender. And the government, the department, is coming forward with guidance. We haven't seen that guidance yet, so I will be looking at that very closely when it comes. And of course, it will then usher in a period of consultation, and there will be opportunity for people of all different views to have input into that. But I really welcome the inclusion of parents more strongly in this whole arena, because what has brought me into looking at issues around this question was acting on behalf of parents and grandparents in my own constituency, where the situation developed where they found out more than a year in that their child had socially transitioned at school without their knowledge. So it's really important that parents are absolutely in the discussions with schools where children are experiencing this gender dysphoria.
Why do you think there's been such an explosion in cases? I mean, I think it was 10 years ago there was like 250 cases, and now 5,000 people identifying in that way in schools. Why do you think we've got such a big... Well, why this has happened so exponentially?
Well, a lot of people talk about the sort of social element of this, and particularly we're seeing that amongst girls. And I think one of the concerns for me and for many others is that this is a particularly difficult period of time, going through those sort of young adolescent years. And what we're seeing very much is that those who are looking to change their gender, there are often other issues to navigate, other conditions to address, or other concerns, unmet learning needs, for example. So those with autism are disproportionately represented in those children looking to change gender. Same with eating disorders, same with looked after children. So my concern very much is that this is a very much wider issue when we're dealing with individual children, and I would be very concerned if sort of, looking to change gender was seen in some ways as the answer to all of these really important issues, because it's much, much more complex than that. And actually starting out on that pathway to social transitioning is not, as we've discovered, not as the evidence base suggests, this is not a neutral act. So we need to move with extreme caution when we're looking at this situation at children who are experiencing this dysphoria.
Oh, and also the conversations that some teachers are having with the kids as well. I mean, there was that teacher who told that child off, who quite rightly said that somebody cannot identify as an animal, and the teacher kind of told the pupil off with regard to say the pupil was wrong. And it's like, well, no, there is, as you said, more to look into it if people are identifying in this way. And even me, when I was young, I was a tomboy. Somebody got into my ear and started telling me things like, oh, well, you could maybe change gender and all this. I might have bought into that. What about the teachers? Will they be given some guidance as well in terms of what they should be teaching with regard to that?
Absolutely, and I think that is also critically important because, again, I've spoken with teachers on these questions, and it cannot be right that in some schools there's been teaching to suggest that there are 10 genders or 20 genders or 75 genders, or indeed that there is no limit to the number of genders that you might align yourself with, and actually that you can create your own gender. That way only, I think, increased anxiety lies. It is really important that there's clarity for teachers and that there's an understanding for parents, and most particularly for children in these very early and important developmental years. It's really important that we look at this through a safeguarding lens.
Yeah, and so your view on the period of reflection that was being suggested is a good one.
I think that's very much lines up with the medical advice as well, that sort of watchful waiting, because my understanding is that the overwhelming majority of children and young people who experience these sort of gender dysphoric feelings come back in the fullness of time as they mature and develop. They come back to a settled place, which is, their biological sex.
Mm. And they also need to be told, if they are going through this sort of thing, the things that they would have to do to maintain this kind of lifestyle if they were to go along with it. Because I know it seems to be a bit of a juggernaut. They get carried away on this, and nobody's actually explaining that actually you start on this. It's a lifetime of maintenance in this, and if you don't, ultimately it's cosmetic surgery. What do you make of the Sarah Jane Baker, who basically said punch all women in the face, TERFs in the face?
I thought that was deeply, deeply troubling, that on the streets of London and in broad daylight, an activist was given this platform, and Sarah Jane Baker, formerly Alan Baker, was convicted of really serious crimes. This is a dangerous individual out on licence, and this call to arms, this rallying cry to assault women who believe in biology, women who are looking to campaign to safeguard women's spaces. So I thought that was extraordinary, and I thought it was extraordinary that the first line of response from the police was that this was a sort of hypothetical situation and didn't in fact represent a hate crime. And I thought it was deeply troubling then that the Labour mayor didn't come out and condemn this either. How are women to be kept safe? How is this debate to be kept open if proclamations such as that are allowed to go by unchallenged and unchecked?
Do you think that because this person identifies as a woman and others who believe that they're women, they think that if they punch a woman in the face, they are women punching women in the face, which, to be honest, most women don't think of doing that to another woman. We women are more likely to, kill you with our nastiness, or, we're more likely to take a different route than one that's physical violence. Do you think that's why they feel they can just say they're going to punch us in the face because they think they're women?
Well, I don't know under any circumstances that this would be in any way appropriate or any way to win people to any kind of argument either. This is dangerous behaviour. We've already seen that women who speak out on this issue have been subjected to death threats and violence. This is no small throwaway line. There was intent there, and this is dangerous. And I really hope a very strong line. It was just a week ago, but I hope we're going to see some really strong action around this.
Well, let's hope that people take this way more seriously, because it's not really acceptable on any level. Caroline, thank you very much for joining me. That's Caroline Ansell. She's the